And we're going to actually have a new challenge coming up pretty soon. I can't tell you exactly when because I have the data, but I haven't done the write-up. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be about soccer. Maybe not that the most interesting subject for everyone, but I think it's got interesting data anyways. And we're going to have, our challenges usually have, well, I hope they will have. We have only done one, right? So they're going to have a design constraint to make it a bit more interesting and make you think harder. And this time we're thinking of going for small factor visualizations. So you're actually only going to have something around 350 times 350 pixels to make a visualization on. And I think that could be a bit of a challenge if you're the one like me that wants to stuff everything into a small chart or a big chart or a dashboard or anything. So I think you should definitely join, and I'll post the link to the challenge both in our Slack channel, and if you haven't joined, I hope you will. We'll put up a link again on our meetup page, and then we will also post it on our GitHub repository, and the link will also be both in the Slack and on the meetup page. Right, and with no further ado, I hope we can start our panel discussion. We did have a bit of a technical issues because I wanted to do this a bit more complicated than was actually needed, which didn't turn out that well. So we'll share this thing here, and like always, I will ask you, can anyone see something? Is there something shared on the screen right now?
Yes.
Super. So this is actually from our Medium page where we talk about the first data visualization challenge we had. And the challenge was to visualize meteorological snow depth and temperature data. And we had a long time series of data spanning more than 100 years. So what happened was that you needed to figure out what the story of the data was and what to do with it. And the design constraint that we had last time was two-tone colors scheme, so only black and white. We had 5 participants for this challenge, and 3 of them will be talking about it here, about this thing here. And we had this one visualization that Alenka did, and she's part of it here. And well, let's do it like this.
I think we only see a white stripe on your screen.
White stripe on the screen. Okay, well, let's stop sharing and do that again then. I will just share my whole desktop then. It's not the best way of doing it, so watch out for the infinity mode first. And maybe, how about that? Do you see anything?
Yeah, great.
Super. So this was Alenka's contribution to for the challenge, and then we also had Nina's and Matthias, and this one is actually an interactive one. So, but before we actually start, I would talk about the design process and the choices that you made. I would like you to introduce yourselves, and I'll actually stop sharing for a little bit and make sure that we can see all of you speaking. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but let's go like this. Alenka, could you please introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I hope my internet connection is okay. Otherwise, I'll change to phone if it will give some problems. My name is Alenka Gutek. I'm originally come from Slovenia, but I live in Uppsala in Sweden. And I work as a postdoc in cell biology and diabetes. So I do lots of visualizations that are related to my scientific research. I love it. It's really nice. This is kind of an experiment and challenges to see where it takes me.
Yeah, super. And talk about postdocs. Maybe I'll ask you, Matthias. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Matthias. I'm a freelance data visualization designer that just started a couple of months ago. And at the moment, I'm still also a postdoc at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. But I already moved to Germany a couple of months ago, and I have quit my postdoc job now. So I will be a full-time data viz designer from April on. And yeah, and I think I totally found my passion here, so I'm quite excited for that.
So, Nina, tell us about you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nina Lindell. I am a data visualization engineer at Telia, where I work with the crowd insights and mobility data. So I'm doing quite a lot of visualization at work, but I still find it super fun to participate in these kind of challenges and other side projects because they stretch your horizons and challenge you to do something different.
Super. So, I'm gonna go in the same order, and you just tell me and what you've done. I'll share a link as Viz, and maybe you can just talk us through what you've done. And let's go for this one, right? And let's see. There we go. So tell us what you've done and why you've done it this way.
Yeah, so as you mentioned before, we had the data for temperature and snow. And to put it in a little bit of context, last month it was a really nice weather here in Uppsala. It was beautiful snow, and I was like, oh, I really want to do visualization with snow because it was very good timing to do it. And in at my work, I'm very constrained with what I do in the sense of the scientific visualizations are pretty, they have a specific style, and you're kind of expected to follow that. So for this challenge, I really wanted to do something fun, and I knew that the audience will be other data visualization experts. So I tested a few different things before I decided for this step chart, where I've plotted the maximum values of snow in a specific year. And by doing that, then I got some kind of an idea what are the maximums, the minimums of this distribution, and because I was kind of by some design ideas from Evelina Judeikte, that was a presenter. Then I really limited my design to this kind of a bit more simple, but where the information would stand out.
Yeah, and I really like the way you've used annotations in it. It makes it, instead of putting some spot like a top line up to here, it was 1 meter of snow, or this was the minimum. You've actually annotated the places where they are, like the average, the min, and the max. So it's really, really nice. Let's go for the next one then. I'm not sure which one it was. Oh, look at that. It's Nina's. Tell me if you want to zoom something. Let's zoom a little bit to the top here. And you tell me what we're looking at, Nina.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a similar story. I started prototyping in Tableau, so I looked at the data there to see how many years we actually have and what are the values. And I kind of wanted to show the trend over time because I was interested in, I think as a lot of us, if it actually snowed more before than it does right now. So I wanted to show this time perspective. But as you can imagine, having so many years in a normal line plot will result in noodles. And also, if these lines would be on top of each other, then the visualization will be very, very long. And at the same time, I also wanted to create this sort of ridgeline plot or joy plot, as it is sometimes called, because it is also not something that I usually do at work. and I wanted to experiment with that. So it seemed like a good match between the volume of the data and the type of chart that allowed me to put this or get rid of these design constraints.
And really nice. I think you mentioned it, but maybe you didn't. But it does look a little bit like snow, like that's on the ground with all these mountains of snow, basically. So it's really nice as well.
Yeah, I thought of that metaphor as well. Seemed like a nice chart for the snow depth data.
So let's zoom in a little bit. And then we got the last one here that we're going to talk about, and it's Matthias, and that one is interactive. So
yeah, I can just drop the link to it also to the chat.
Yeah. So that's pretty nice. With this, it actually looks like it's snow coming down on the top of the chart.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I'm always intrigued of spirals, and the data set was, I think, perfect to use a time spiral, because I was interested in the seasonalities in this data set to directly compare like summer in one year versus summer in another year. And I mean, challenges or side projects in general are always great to learn new stuff, and I never did such a spiral before, so I went for it here. And at the same time, I also tried to, as this was a black and white theme, I tried to also convert the data into a black and white theme. So I used the snow heights, not as continuous variable, but just as categorical variable, was there snow or not on a certain day. And I did the same for the temperatures, like was the temperature above 10 degrees or not? So just to answer this yes, no question for every day. And then I used these two symbols, like the thickness of the spiral line for the temperature and the snowflakes, these rings, and to make it a little bit more clearer that this is the snow, I added the animation in the beginning when you load the page.
Let's do that again. There we go. It's really nice.
Yeah, so that was the reason behind it. And in general, some of you might know that from me, I love using circles in dataviz. So the spiral here is also a really nice implementation of circular radial data visualization. Yeah.
So I've been hearing from all of you that you do. It seems to be like you like the challenge because you could do something new basically as well, and also that you did a lot of prototyping before, or did you do prototyping to find out what you wanted to do, or was it because you were more like I already know what to do, but I'm not exactly sure how it's going to be implemented, it's the details? Or did you explore different types of visualizations using this iterative process? Anyone can feel free to join in.
Yeah, I think I did both. I kind of had the idea, but I wanted to validate that it will work. Yeah, I think I kind of straight away went into something like this without experimenting that much with the different types of charts.
Right. And how about you, Alenka?
Yeah, so for me, I was first very interested into if I could actually do the kind of the snow that has fallen, so that I would get the overall increase in the snow through the whole year. But then I figure out that from the data that we've got, that is just information on how much snow there is, and actually not on how much snow it has fallen. So therefore, I decided that this might be a better way to do that, as if that would be an but this one then really was like pretty on the graphs.
Yeah. And you, Matthias, you wanted to make a spiral, but I'm guessing it's not that easy to make one. Did you need to experiment a lot with because this must be custom code, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I started with pen and paper actually. So I was sure about using the spiral, and I draw the spiral and tried to put some symbols on it to represent the temperatures and the snow heights and so on, to just know if this looks somewhat understandable and that it's easy to grasp. And that was very fine, but that was like the first 30 minutes of the work. Then I quickly moved to code. So I do a lot of prototyping by code. And indeed, yeah, I programmed the function which is drawing the spiral, and then I changed all the parameters over and over again. So as you might see here, this is using now the last 40 years of the data set. So it's not using the full data set. It starts 1980. Because that was like also a little bit of compromise. What does look easy to understand yet, and what reveals a lot of patterns at the same time. And I also thought, okay, from beginning from 1980, that is basically the time that most of us maybe can remember a lot of. So that was, yeah, I tried a lot with coding, so a lot of design by code.
Yeah. So that actually leads to an interesting question. Why did you choose to start with the 1980s? Because it looked good, or was there another reason?
Yeah, I tried it decade-wise, and I'm born 87, so yeah, I have some relationship to the 80s from that perspective, and I think this is why I've chosen it, because that covers like, yeah, or 90% of that spiral covers my whole life. So it was a very personal perspective in that sense. And of course, yeah, it was also compromised. It looked also quite nice when starting 1990 or 2000, but the patterns, the overall patterns, like for example, that there are some days in the winter where it is above 10 degrees, that is only visible when you have more data. And so this was like this compromise between how much data to show, how much to hide, actually.
All right. Let's see here. We have also 1940, maybe a bit earlier, and 1970. So maybe you, Alenka, and Nina can tell us about why you split the date, took from that year.
Yeah, I can start. It was a very simple reason, and it was that that was the time snow data started. So I took the whole area.
So it's the whole data. And how about you, Nina?
Yeah.
I had a more pragmatic reason, maybe, or like less based on the data. So my chart is very long, and it would have been even longer if I took the whole history. So I decided to go with the last 50 years.
All right. It's a nice round number. I actually noticed one thing here on yours, Alenka. So if you have every year, the steps are kind of smoothed. Did you take an average, or is this is not what would that be, 80 steps, or are there?
Yes, I think they are. This is like every year has its own step. Yeah.
Wow. It looks actually, I think I would have guessed it would have looked much more jagged than this then. Cool. Right. And so you've been talking about some of your the process of how you've been doing this thing. Could you tell me a bit about what tools you've been using when you create your visualizations, more in general, and also like for this challenge? Let's go, Nina. You're up because you're on. I have you online on the screen share here.
So I at least for this challenge, did my first prototype in Tableau. So I looked at the data there and was able to produce a similar chart. And then since there is no really easy way to do this kind of ridge line plot in that tool, and because I'm also trying to learn D3, I thought it is a good opportunity to stretch myself a little bit and make something new in D3. And as a base, I used a lot of examples on observable. So I found similar plots and looked at how people handle the data, what things need to be encoded. And I think without those examples, I wouldn't be able to produce this chart, but I learned a lot on the way.
Was it the data handling or the visualization part that was the hard thing?
I think the data handling, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around how D3 prefers to have data structured for different types of visualizations, is not as straightforward as a CSV file with just rows and columns. So that was the most difficult, I think.
Yeah. Then let's go for the one to the right here. So that will be yours, Matthias. Could you tell us a little bit about your tools that you used?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I have used Svelte, which is a front-end framework for writing JavaScript for the browser, because I wanted to have this interactive visualization with the labelings to explain some of the patterns, and also that it runs on mobile and desktop. And Svelte is really cool to build all this interactivity with not much code. And on top, for the math and the paths, I also use D3. So, for example, to calculate the path of this spiral line and the thicknesses, and also the snowflake circles and so on. So it's a mix of Svelte and D3.
Yeah, and I actually have a little bit of a cheat sheet here telling me that you, Alenka, did not code this thing up in JavaScript. So you're the odd one out. How did you actually create this chart?
Yeah, so I'm pretty new to dataviz, and I cannot do JavaScript yet. But actually, I'm learning Python now. So I first wanted to do the data handling in pandas. But I very soon got to the point that I didn't know then yet that data time libraries exist, so I couldn't really do much. That's why I just went to the tools that I'm using every day for my work, which are Excel, Origin, and CorelDRAW. And I've done all the data handling in Excel. Then I did the graph, the vector version of it in Origin. And then I used CorelDRAW, which is similar to Adobe Illustrator. I kind of prefer CorelDRAW because it's a bit more intuitive. And then I used that to then add all of the annotations and change the fonts and the line strength. So that was my process.
So am I understanding that you did, in Excel, you did basically a chart, and then what? But then
I didn't do. I just I found all the. I grouped the data to find the maximums, and then I used Origin Lab, which is like one. It's a pretty nice program to do lots of different graphs. And it's a bit of a funny story because whenever I'm doing my work, then I have all these line plots and stuff like that, and I'm always looking at this. Oh, there is this step increases. How could I use that? And this was like a perfect opportunity to test it out.
Super. And I will have to check that out. I haven't heard about it even, so this is very interesting. All right. So it sounds like we've had a little bit of different challenges. I mean, when I did these challenges, it was basically deciding on what to do. The idea, I had too much inspiration and it was too much data. So I tried to fit everything in at the same time, all of it in one chart or one graph. Could you maybe tell us what challenges you had with that, something that you've learned during this process of this challenge, if there's anything with a tool or in your process, or how you go about doing the visualizations in code or something like that. So something you want to share with others.
Yeah, I can start. So for me, the challenge was like what is not shown here is like some of the ideas I had before, and it was because I wanted to make something fun. I wanted to make a GIF out of this, so there would be like falling snow on top that is moving, and then maybe even filling up these bars to fill it up. And then actually my biggest challenge was that I couldn't do this with the tools that I was using. So I tested things out a little bit. I made snow, and then I made it fall in CorelDRAW, but then I had to save every single frame, and it just didn't look good. So then I just simplified it. I made it very clear and clean, hopefully.
Yeah, it is really clear. I mean, it shows I think I'm the oldest here, but it really shows that my childhood was the snowiest one. So and I think that's if you just want to have the snow depths and compare 2 years, this is really, really nice. Let's go for Nina then.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the data handling was a challenge for me. And one of unsolved challenges is also mentioned in the post. I wanted to have winters as one block. So I think at least I perceive winter not as winter 2021 or winter 2020, but I see it as December to February, or maybe in some years November to March. It depends on when it starts getting cold.
Yeah, so we're talking about this gap here in the middle, which is so winter for 1970 goes here, but there's also another winter in 1970, but it's the end of the year.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to this December of 1970 together with 1971. So that is something that I haven't figured out in the week that we had for the challenge. And additionally, I think there is a February 29th issue as well. So it would show up as a gap for the years where it is missing.
Ah, I see. It would be hard to find maybe here, but
yeah, it is there.
So, and did you find anything especially challenging that you want to share, Matthias?
Yeah, I wanted to show snow and temperature at the same time, and this turned out to be a bit of a challenge because also given the fixed color scheme of two colors, to make them separable from each other. So this is also why I added the animation in the end. And this was like the second learning or second challenge I had to have the animation of so much circles on the screen, and usually you can't do that in SVG. So you need to go to Canvas or WebGL. So yeah, I used Canvas, and I tried a new technique in Svelte, how you can like declaratively write code for these snowflakes, and that was like a little bit, yeah, the challenge on top of everything.
Super. I actually think this is an interesting example, right? Because it makes it hard when you have multiple like data dimensions. So to show it in one graph, sometimes it's not that easy. Maybe I can just ask you then. So if these broad lines are temperature, and then you got snow, when is that when it's negative, when it is below 0, where you don't have heat, or how does it work?
Yeah, so the line thickness encodes days above 10 degrees. So if the line is thick, there was the temperature above 10 degrees. There is basically never the case that you have snow and a day above 10 degrees. So this is also the reason why I choose this 10 degrees. Although a lot of people on Twitter found it funny that I say that a day above 10 degrees is a hot day in Stockholm.
It is.
Yeah, and yeah, that's just the reason. And I mean, it's that the curve for this line thickness is of course smooth. So although it's just a binary variable, it smooths out a little bit, and this makes these singular days where you have the temperature above 10 degrees, like in the winter, so stand out a little bit, which is a very nice effect.
Super. So maybe we should start wrapping this thing up. But maybe does any one of you have anything else to say, or before we wrap it up for this discussion? No, or
I was just curious, Matthias, have you used or tried the other encodings before you arrived on this categorical decision?
Yeah, actually I started with the temperatures, and I tried to just use a line chart on the spiral. So like using the spiral line as a line chart for the temperatures, that was basically unreadable because the differences are very tiny from day to day. And then when you have so much years on top of each other in the spiral, it's very hard to grasp where is a hot day, where is a cold day. And so this was one reason to also go for this binary encoding.
Yeah, I think I like the way all of you have a little bit simplified it. So you've done binary here. We did have, the dataset did have temperature and snow, but like here as well, Nina, you decided to go with the snow because that was the most interesting thing. And also here, Alenka. So I think this is pretty...
Can I
like
ask one question roughly?
Somebody was talking. But then I think this is interesting how you have to actually look in the data and find out what you want to show and not just everything at once.
Okay.
All right. So let's make that a wrap then. So at the end here, I just wanted to say again that I wanted to show where we have our GitHub repository for the challenges, and this is the first one. And I'll make sure to that we'll write up the next challenge, the number 2, on soccer, tentatively called the Beautiful Data Game. So we'll see. And I think that would be it for now. I'll stop sharing for a little bit. And let's mute everyone. And let's go for our next guests. Let's see. Nina, can you set up the unmuting? And we have Duncan and Miriam here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Wow, Duncan, you have a nice professional setup there.
I've got a fancy microphone. I think
Exactly.
that's basically it, and a pop filter.
All right. So I was actually about to introduce you, but since you're both have better sound setup than me, maybe you can introduce yourselves just before we start the presentation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we've actually got a little bit of an intro thing at the very start of the presentation, so we can go straight into it if you'd like.
Yeah, please do.
Miriam, how are we doing this? Are you going to share your screen or?
Yeah, I can start showing my screen now, or we can wait till a little bit further down. What do you think?
All right, let's just get started, shall we?
Let's just start. All right.
All right. So my name is Duncan. I'm an information designer based down in Göteborg in the south of Sweden. I'm one half of Loud Numbers, and I got into sonification because I've always loved music. I basically spent my childhood years listening to a lot of Queen. And then as a teenager, I learned to play the bass guitar and I joined a bunch of bands. And then I became a DJ and I started running indie discos in my 20s. And then everyone stopped listening to indie music and I stopped DJing. But I've, I almost ended up working in the music industry at one point in my career, but then I became a journalist instead. And over time, that led me into data journalism and basically to my work today as an information designer, working with both data visualization and with text. But the music stuff has never really left me. I've made a bunch of visualizations over the years that are very oriented around music. probably most notably my 2019 piece, which is called Time for Heroes. I'll throw a link in the chat. It is here. Which basically maps like lines of influence in the indie music scene in the mid 2000s. And I think there's one or two Swedish bands in there. The Hives are in there almost certainly, but maybe a few others as well. And it was basically inevitable that I was going to get interested in data sonification, turning data into sound.
Hi, my name is Miriam, and I'm the other half of Loud Numbers, and I'm a data journalist based in the UK in the southwest of England. Like Duncan, I've got a kind of varied musical history. So I played a lot of instruments when I was growing up. I studied music at university. I did a master's and a PhD in music as well. My PhD was in musicology at King's College London. And I also kind of DJ'd a little bit on the side, but more house and techno, less indie. And during my doctoral research, I became fascinated by how gathering data from recorded music, I was actually looking at performance style through recordings, how gathering this data could supplement the things that your ears could actually hear. And that was really where my interest in data and in visualization was born. So that was 2010. Since then, I left academia and I started work as a data journalist. And I've always been keen to find ways to bring the worlds of data and music together. So one example is my project dataviz, which was made with Valentina De Filippo, and it visualizes musical data from David Bowie's song Space Oddity on a series of 10 engraved records. Yeah, thanks, Duncan. You're going to put that in the link is in the chat. So yeah, like Duncan, it was really only a matter of time before I got involved in sonification.
Yeah, so over the past year or so, we've been working on a project called Loud Numbers, which until very recently we thought was the world's first data sonification podcast. And then we learned when a guy emailed us and was like, hey, do you want to be on my data sonification podcast? We learned that we weren't the first. But I think we're the first podcast which is about like playing data visualizations rather than talking about data visualizations. So, sorry, sonifications. So yeah, I'm going to call us still the world's first data sonification podcast. What is this word that I keep saying? Sonification. So if you're not familiar with it, it's basically the practice of turning data into sound. But with Loud Numbers, we wanted to go a step further and make not just sounds, but actual music, right? And the reason is because music has this very special place in our culture, yeah? People have been telling stories with music for millennia. It kind of excites us, it energizes us, but it can also sort of scare us or console us. It has this weird, like, direct line straight into our hearts as well as into our heads. And it's this very, very powerful way to communicate. And so when our podcast, which is called Loud Numbers, is released later this year, you're going to hear us introduce 6 different data stories. Might be 5. We're still talking about that. And talk about how we turn them into music and then like hear the final track, the final piece of music that we've created from that data. And at the end of the talk today, you'll actually be able to hear one of the tracks from one of those episodes. But first, Miriam is going to give you a little bit more background, I'm going to give you a little bit more background on sonification. And then Miriam is going to talk a bit about the nuts and bolts.
I'll just share my screen at this point.
Yeah, now is a good time, I think.
Yeah.
So while you're doing that, I can do the intro. Yeah. So basically, there's a bunch of different ways that you can map out the landscape of sonification. But we particularly like a method that a German sonification researcher called Thomas Hermann developed in 2002. And he wrote it all up in an academic paper. He basically proposed 5 different categories of sonification, and we've kind of simplified those down to 3 because it's a little bit easier, but you'll see why in a minute. So the first kind of sonification is audification. And that's when you get a bunch of data and you use like time stretching and pitch shifting to get it into a range that can be heard by the human ear. One example of this might be sounds of the sun, which was published in 2018 by NASA using data from its Solar Heliospheric Observatory. And this data is it's the raw data, but it's sped up by a factor of 42,000 to bring it into the range of human hearing. Miriam's going to play you a little sample.
Sorry, I'm just going to make sure I've shared my audio. Apologies. Okay, I'm going to stop share and then reshare again. All right, I think we're there now. So this is the NASA sun sonification.
So that's like literally what the sun sounds like if you sped it up 42,000 times, which is kind of crazy. And then the second category that we like to use is one that Herman divided into two different things. One of them is ear cons, and the other one is auditory icons, right? And these are short little audio clips that represent events like phone notifications or the bloop of a barcode scanner in a supermarket or something. And the way that Herman distinguishes the two is basically ear cons are like abstract pings and bloops and blobs or whatever. But auditory icons sound like the thing that they represent. So that might be like the sound of a cash register going bing to indicate a sale or something like that. This can be like a really simple but very effective way to sonify data. And there's a great bit of work by Tactical Technology Collective, which represents buildings collapsing in Egypt with the sound of a collapsing building. Miriam's going to play you 5 seconds or so of this. So yeah, it's quite compelling when you literally hear the sound of a collapsing building to represent a collapsing building, right? And then finally, there's this what a lot of dataviz folks think of when they think of sonification, which is parameter mapping. And this is where you map data values onto different audio properties, right? Like pitch, volume, duration, tempo, and so on. And this is the approach that we've taken with loud numbers. So just like in visualization, some of those mappings are much, much more effective at communicating data than others are. So I'm going to pass you over to Miriam now to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've learned in the last year of sonification work.
So some of the things we've learned are that sound, firstly, has got real advantages over visuals for communicating certain kinds of data. And one real standout is time series data. It's very, very good at communicating time series data. And the reason for this is that sound can only be experienced through time. So any data that also unfolds over time, so that could be things like population, changing population, GDP, or the number of collapsing houses, it's a kind of a natural fit for sonification. And I'm just going to play you an example now. It's a sonification of climate data, and it's by a composer called Chris Chafe, who's based in the US. And if you listen to it, the pitch of the siren sound represents the average global temperatures from the late 17th century to 2016. And the pitch of the plucked string sounds represent atmospheric CO2 concentrations over the same period. So you've got temperature and you've got CO2. There's like two different layers or strata. So I'll play you a bit from the early 18th century and then skip forward. You can hear the difference. So 1930s now. Then 1995. So yeah, it's kind of scary. You can really hear this rapid acceleration in temperature and CO2 in recent years as the pitch of both sounds rises faster and faster towards the end.
Good grammar and spelling are important.
YouTube. So this sonification, it not only makes the changes over time audible, it kind of immerses you in this sort of, like a musical sort of dramatic narrative. So with sonification, you have the power as the creator to control the pace at which a story unfolds, which is really important. And sound is much harder to ignore than visual content, I would argue. There's no real listening equivalent to like skim reading an article or kind of glancing to get a quick overview of a chart. Sonification is not very good at overview. It's very, very good at immersion. Because, you know, you can't look away from a sound, although you can obviously turn it off or do something else while listening, but it's got that much more kind of present-centered and immersive focus. So with this climate change example, much of the dramatic effect is down to the choice of sounds used. So when you hear a siren wailing higher and higher, it reminds you of an ambulance or an emergency. It's really hard not to feel a sense of growing panic and urgency. So sonification, we've discovered, is really well suited to highly emotive data, because sounds often evoke moods and they have strong emotional connotations. So I'm sure you're all aware of this, but I'm going to play you a couple of examples that just make this super clear. So if you compare the emotional connotations that you have from listening to the sound of a bell versus this sound. So yeah, so I find it really hard to give straight face when that sound plays. Completely, almost like diametrically opposite emotional connotations. You'll hear that sound again, by the way. So some of the most powerful sonifications can be very, very simple, like the climate sonification that we just played. But on the other hand, sonification is also very well suited to complex or to multidimensional data. And this is because sound can vary in many different ways at once. And you could take advantage of this by mapping one aspect of your data to pitch, another to loudness, another to instrument, and so on. So in one of our upcoming podcast episodes, we actually sonify the taste and aroma of 10 different beers. And the audio characteristics of each instrumental line are determined by scores, which were compiled by a beer expert, who I believe is based in Stockholm, right, Duncan? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Marlin Davinger.
Yeah, she is a cicerone, which is a beer expert. It's like a sommelier, but for beer. And she has this wonderful scoring system where she tests and assesses beers by these very rigorous criteria of various taste and aroma parameters. And these are things like acidity, carbonation, hoppiness, and so on. And so in our sonification, there's actually a total of 10 different sound mappings, because taste is very, very complex. And if you're going to communicate taste in all its dimensions, you need to have a complex sonification to do this. So I'm going to play you just one of these mappings. This is the amount of fizziness or carbonation in a beer. And it's represented in our sonification by the relative loudness of this sound. So I like to think that's a kind of a fizzy sound. It kind of sounds like bubbles in a beer. So over the last year, we've really enjoyed kind of exploring how to map different audio parameters to data. And we've learned a lot more about which kinds of mappings work best and in which contexts. One of the things that we have learned and that we've really kind of explored is how to look beyond pitch. So pitch is often used in data sonification to communicate quantity. So that means that notes of a higher pitch signify more of something. So, you know, more people, more money, more cars, more CO2, whatever. Pitch is the default mapping in two-tone, which is a free sonification app. I'll just share my screen now. So this is two-tone. You may have seen it's a pretty great, very simple sonification app at twotone.io. It's online. And this is a sonification of one of their example data sets, which is kind of weird. It's a Prussian cavalry killed by horse kicks between 1875 and 1894. Here, pitch is used as the mapping. The higher the note, the more cavalry were killed each year. But I'm just going to play you it now. And as you listen to it, ask yourself if that mapping feels effective. I'm not sure if it does. Like, to me, it feels kind of weird. I mean, A, the data is weird, but B, the mapping is slightly unintuitive. So my opinion is that mapping pitch to quantity makes sense on one level. So in data visualization, for example, higher typically means more. You have, you know, a taller bar means more data. A higher line means more data. And in music notation as well, notes of a higher pitch are written nearer the top of the stave. But if you think about the physical origins of pitch, like in the real world, it's actually the smaller instruments, like the smaller drums, the shorter strings that make the higher sounds. And conversely, it's the larger drums and the longer strings that make the lower sounds. So pitch has this kind of inherent ambiguity to it, which I think can be slightly confusing. However, there are loads of other options. You can map quantity to loudness so that louder sounds equal more data. You can map it to the number of instruments playing, so more instruments playing equals more data. Even to EQ, so a bassier sound equals more data. To duration, longer sound equals more data. To the number of sounds in the time period. To tempo, so faster equals more data. Even to the direction that the audio is coming from. So for example, if a sound might start on the left of the audio field and you hear it in your left headphone and then it moves to the right as time progresses, which is something that I've heard done in sonification. Or you can actually double or triple map these to map data to one of these. So you could have, as the data increases, the sound gets louder and the pitch gets higher, for example. So how do you know which audio parameters to use? Well, each one has got unique qualities and it's also got distinct limitations. For example, loudness can be really powerful, but it is affected by the playback system. So the volume level and the bass response. You know, I don't know exactly how loud this sound that I'm playing via the Zoom stream is going to appear on your system, for example. And it can also be affected by audio engineering techniques like compression. So loudness, we feel, is best used to communicate large differences and obvious trends. Another parameter is instrumentation, which is really great for communicating categories of data. So for example, you might decide that trumpets mean one kind of data, violins mean a second, and drums a third, for example. And there are occasions where pitch is very useful, despite what I said earlier. So our ears are generally very good at detecting small pitch shifts. So tiny pitch differences can effectively communicate tiny differences in underlying data values. And another thing that pitch is really good at is that it's kind of flexible. So it can slide like this. So that makes it great for data that varies continuously, like height across the population. And it can also form discrete steps of a scale like this. So it's also good for data that forms ordered categories like income brackets or age groups. With loud numbers, our sonifications are also pieces of music. So we typically use traditional musical sounds, structures and genres. For example, one sonification we're working on at the moment represents the number of laws in the EU database of laws as the number of voices in a classical piece, which is inspired by kind of a traditional European classical style. So as the number of laws increases and we've binned the data, the number of voices increases in the musical texture. And finally, we've learned that people are generally less used to hearing data than to seeing it. So if you make a sonification, it's generally a good idea to kind of clearly explain how you've mapped the data onto sound. And you can use a text description, you can use an audio description, or you can use a visual description. And the rules on what works and what doesn't are still being written for sonification, which makes it a really, really exciting field to be involved in at the moment.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like sonification has been around for about 70 years or something like that, at least, that we know of. That's as far as our research has gone back. But it still feels like something that's like very cutting edge and new. And yeah, it's kind of curious that. So now you know how sonification works, basically. We're going to show you one of the pieces that we've been working on. And we're going to do this a little bit like we would in the podcast itself, where we tell the story, and then we explain the sonification system, and then we'll end the talk with the final sonification itself. And we might turn off our cameras during that, because otherwise we just have to sit here awkwardly while you listen to music for 5 minutes. But yeah, this episode is called Boom and Bust.
The economy of the United States is the largest in the world. Every year, its population produces more than $20 trillion worth of goods and services. And that number is what economists call gross domestic product, or GDP. So GDP normally grows by a few percent each year, but every so often something happens that causes it to fall. A large geopolitical event, the collapse of a stock market bubble, or this year, a global pandemic. So these falls are called recessions, and they're generally bad news. Unemployment rises and stock markets plummet. We're told that money makes the world go round, that it doesn't grow on trees, and that it can't buy happiness. Today, though, we're asking, what does money sound like? So Duncan, where did the idea for this story come from?
I think originally this was an idea of yours. In one of the notes for our earliest meetings about this whole project, you wrote the sound of the US economy over time on one line and then sampled drum loops on the next line.
Yeah, so I had this idea that financial data would work really well in music because it's normally reported in quarters, which gives it a natural 4/4 beat.
Yeah, we wanted to tell the story of the US economy since the late 60s. It's this crazy roller coaster ride of booms and busts set against a background of dramatic changes in both the United States and in the wider world. There are oil shocks, there's dot-com collapses, there's Reaganomics, but throughout this whole time, the economy just keeps on growing.
There's also the dramatic rise of inequality over that time span. At the start of our data, which is in 1968, the poorest half of the US population took home about 20% of national income, while the richest 1% laid claim to about a tenth. But today, those proportions are actually reversed.
Now, our track is based around a beat, but it's not just any beat. It's called the Amen break, and it's this legendary drum sample. You might not know it by name, but you will know it when you hear it because it's like the foundation of all kinds of genres of music. Right, you know that, yeah? It comes originally from the 1969 track, which is called Amen Brother by a soul group called the Winstons, who got absolutely no money from the sampling process, unfortunately. But here it is in the context of the original song. So yeah, this is basically the foundation of hip hop, of drum and bass, of all kinds of electronic music. It's the most sampled song in music history. According to whosampled.com, it had been sampled in no fewer than 4,800 songs by the time we wrote this talk.
So we thought we'd just add one to that total. So our sonification speeds up the Amen break to 160 beats per minute to make a track that's heavily influenced by early 90s UK jungle and rave music, because I like early 90s jungle music and rave music, and also because the US economy is a party and not everyone is invited.
Yeah, but there's data in these drum loops, right? So our track maps the Amen break to the state of the US economy each quarter. So when it's playing forwards, the economy is going strong, and it sounds like this. But then when the US economy starts cooling down and spinning backwards into a recession, the music spins backwards. And then when the economy moves out of a recession, there's no better way to get a crowd going than this. And then we also sonify the value of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which tracks the performance. It's basically this weird imaginary number. It tracks the performance of 30 leading companies in the United States. And we've mapped that to a gentle, wispy synthesizer sound, which rises in pitch as the Dow Jones rises. It's quite nice, isn't it? Very relaxing.
And we're also tracking inequality with a sample. So there actually are a lot of vocal samples on this track, as you'll hear, and they generally help tell the story of the data around that time point. So they're not really communicating data themselves. They're more like Ronald Reagan talking about 1980s when the track is at the point in the 1980s, for example. But when you listen to the track, listen out for one sample in particular, because it sounds like this. Now, the volume of that sample represents the share of national income that goes to the richest 1%. So listen out for the volume of the sample and how it changes throughout the track.
A bad man, in case you're not familiar with the term, is a Jamaican street slang for somebody who's very powerful, who commands respect, an elite, basically. It works on several levels.
Finally, US presidents are fond of making bombastic statements about the economy. So in years when there was a presidential election, you'll hear this bass line. Since US elections happen every 4 years, the bass drops every 16 bars. I do really like it when data kind of naturally forms these musical sounding patterns. I think that's it. You're ready to hear the whole thing. So let me just bring up the sample and we will turn our cameras off so you don't have to watch us. This is Boom and Bust.
It's the economy, stupid!
It will be essential for all of us to live and work in lower temperatures. We must ask everyone to lower the thermostat. The cuts must now go deeper.
All of us must learn to waste less energy. If we learn to live thriftily and remember the importance of helping our neighbors, then we can find ways to adjust.
This is unreal. Isn't this disgusting? Why doesn't anybody contact the president? Why is he letting this happen to us?
It is a crisis. It is a crisis.
Reaganomics fiscal disaster.
It is a crisis of confidence.
Reaganomics. 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 Reaganomics.
The power to tax is the power to destroy. The power to tax is the power to destroy. The power to destroy.
The 80s was a very special decade. The 80s was a very special decade.
What a bank has for sale.
The 80s was a very special decade.
What a bank has for sale is information.
Reviving the American dream by restoring the American economy.
Sure, I think we all dream. I think that's the fun part of life is being able to have a dream that hopefully someday will come true.
You want to be successful? You want to be like Trump?
For a long period of time, there's very little risk in stocks. Owning a diversified group of companies, you're going to participate in the growth of America, the growth of America, the growth of America.
The growing power of the internet.
The information technology revolution. The money is flooding out of Wall Street like the dam has burst. There has been the most extraordinary amount of wealth creation. You've got to be perverse to say the market's going to crash.
Much of the financial sector has ended up just financing finance, insurance, and real estate, which conveniently, the acronym is higher. The profits being earned are not actually being reinvested higher. Back into production, back into the workforce, human capital and skill, research and development.
An extraordinary period for America's economy. We've seen triple-digit swings in the stock market. Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed. We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis.
Capitalism is the solution. Capitalism is the only solution that they have to their problems.
we can fundamentally change the system.
Yes, we can. The American people are hungry. Yes, we can.
The stories we are telling, first of all, they're just stories. The economy is a story.
You want to be successful? You want to be like Trump? You want to be like Trump?
America first. It's going to be only America first.
You want to be successful? You want to be like Trump? Gimme, gimme, gimme. Push, 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 push. Step, step, step. Crush, crush, crush. I know you're rich. I know you got $40 billion. But can you just keep it to one house? There's no way. There's no way that these people should own planes and their people don't have houses, apartments, shacks, drawers, pants. Even if you earned it, you still owe.
So there you go. That was Tupac at the end there, giving us all a lesson in inequality. And that's also the end of our talk. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to follow our work or find out a little bit more about what we're doing, as well as see some of the other amazing things being produced by the sonification community, then we have like a weekly development log newsletter where you can follow our progress to releasing the podcast. You can sign up for that at loudnumbers.net. And you can also follow us on Twitter. We are at Twitter, we are at Loud Numbers. Yeah, and we would love to answer any questions that you have. I think there's already been a few posted in the chat.
Yeah, let's see. Maybe I can read some of the questions out loud. So let's see. Where do we start? Wow. There's the first one that I can see is from Matthias, and it's how is the audio perception? How does human audio perception? How does it work? Do we hear linear increase of values as a linear increase when we listen?
Shall I take that one? That's a really complicated question, actually. It totally depends. Basically, no, but it depends on what parameter you're talking about. Exactly how, in what way it's non-linear. So, with pitch, for example, there is this difference between pitch and frequency. The frequency, as in the number of vibrations per second in a sound, is measured in hertz. And a doubling of hertz, let's say you double a sound from 200 hertz to 400 hertz, will sound an octave higher. So if you've ever studied music theory, then an octave kind of sounds like that note, but higher, but it has this sort of identity to it. But it doesn't sound twice as high. That's the key thing. Like a doubling of frequency doesn't sound twice as high in pitch. It sounds related, higher. So there is always this kind of slight arbitrariness to the mappings. Same with loudness. Loudness perception is also quite non-linear. I'm a bit hazy on the details, but yeah, basically there's a logarithmic relationship in terms of perceived loudness and the actual energy in the sound wave.
So, yeah, there's a bunch of different things in that, right? There's like amplitude, there's loudness, there's volume, and they're all like similar, but they're like none of them are exactly the same thing. And I think even we're a little fuzzy on the details for that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really important question because, you know, when you are coming up with this way of mapping parameters to sound, you're always kind of working out what the scale is going to be and what sort of scale is appropriate. Is honest given the data and is going to bring out the changes that you want to be audible, and also kind of work with your sonification in terms of like if you're trying to do it musically, then maybe you'll map it to a scale or something like that. So making a decision about how to scale and how to normalize the data to sound is really, really key and is really important, and it's kind of different in every sonification. For us at least, it's different. And I don't know if there's a standard way of doing it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Matthias. So, or at least a little bit. And actually, that leads maybe to a question that I had, and somebody else also had it here. Is how do you actually start with this? What's the resources that you have? Do you have to study cognitive psychology or music theory to start this, or?
I mean, I've got no music theory background whatsoever. You know, I played in bands and stuff like that, and so I've got a good sense of like what I think sounds good, but I have no like proper theory or training or whatever. I just make sonifications that I think sound nice. And Miriam, on the other hand, has like a full-on PhD in musicology, so she's the person to ask if you want to know whether the thing that you think sounds nice actually officially sounds nice.
Well, it's all subjective, but no, I mean, it's definitely not something that you need a qualification to do. And things like two-tone, anybody can use. You can go and try, upload your own data to them, and make a sonification very, very quickly. So yeah, absolutely not something you need to have a PhD in music to do.
The more complicated things that you just showed us, right? How did you make that one, and how long did it take?
Do you want to talk about the process, Miriam?
Sure, yes. So the track that we just played, and in fact most of our tracks are made in kind of two stages. The first stage is the coding stage, and the second stage is like the audio stage. The coding stage is done in a tool called SonicPy, which was actually developed as a kind of live coding environment for people who want to. It's often used by people who would do algo raves. So a guy or a girl will like stand and code live, and sounds will come out in real time, and then there'll be a dance floor and people will kind of dance to it. And so it's a nice hybrid of like raving and coding. It was developed largely for that, but we find it very useful for sonification. It works in Ruby, so you can use that syntax to read your data set and to transform it and to turn that into sound. And I believe, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I believe that SonicPy runs on the Super Collider program. That's what underlies it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so that's stage one, is we make a kind of framework in code, which might not sound all that great. We use SonicPy presets, but it kind of works, and we work out the system and all the mappings and the scales of that stage. And then I will take those raw audio files into Logic, the Apple's of DAW, and then make them sound good. So that might mean using different sounds for the same data, or it might mean just kind of taking the audio and just putting some effects on it or whatever, build that up kind of track by track, mix it down, and then we get our tracks mastered as well, so they do actually sound as good as they can do. We use a studio called Queer Era in Berlin. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell, really. How long does it take? Gosh, quite a long time, doesn't it?
We sort of go between, like, we're working on 6 at the same time, so we sort of drift in between different ones at different points. I would say maybe like, I don't know, we're sort of doing this part-time alongside our main jobs, so we maybe spend like a month and a half on one sonification, but that's obviously not like full-time working. That's maybe like a day a week, you know, alongside doing all the other stuff that we need to do. I will add a note on SonicPy, which is that it's Ruby. I had never coded in Ruby before I tried SonicPy, and the tutorial is amazing. It is so like easy to follow, very accessible, easy to get into. It runs on a Raspberry Pi. That's why it's called SonicPy. So if you have like any interest or inclination toward coding, then I think you'll be able to go a long way towards getting something that sounds good out of it.
Yeah, sounds great. I had a question from Nina here asking about, you mentioned legends for your sonifications, and she asks you if you can explain that or describe that a little bit more.
It's tricky, right? Because you can't like look backwards and forwards between the legend and the chart to see what's going on. So you have to kind of remember it. I mean, you heard like what we're going to be doing in this podcast, which is basically explaining all the little different pieces bit by bit and then playing the full track. That seems like the best way that we could figure out how to do it in audio alone. I think if you are mixing up audio and visual components, then it becomes a lot easier. But I'm very open to ideas. Do you have any further thoughts, Miriam?
Yeah, I guess what you just said is that we are thinking in terms of audio alone for this podcast, because it is a podcast. But I actually really like legends for sonifications. I think they can be incredibly helpful. And at the same time, I think sometimes if you have both a visual component and an auditory component, sometimes the visual component can dominate a bit, particularly if you're used to working with visualizations rather than sonifications, and can come to stand in for the sound rather than actually enabling you to listen to the sound. So I think it's a fine balance. Personally, I really like them, but I'm also aware that, you know, sometimes visuals swamp everything and become the dominant modality, if you like. And I think we're kind of keen to just explore what audio alone can do with this project.
It's definitely tricky because, like, with a pie chart or a bar chart or something like that, like almost everybody in the world who's going to see one of those probably understands what they are to some extent, right? The bar is bigger, there's more stuff. Whereas people aren't anywhere near as familiar with sonifications. And so all of the mappings that we talked about before, those don't necessarily come easily to people. There are definitely some that are more intuitive than others, and we talked a little bit about that. But there is, I don't know, a lot more like weight being shouldered by the legend maybe in a sonification than there would be in a dataviz.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that, like, two-tone, for example, has a little chart that moves at the same time as the sound. It doesn't just give you the sound, it gives you the bar chart, and it gives you the table of data that's kind of simultaneously highlighted with the sound. So they kind of almost assume that you won't be able to translate the sound into data by yourself, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, actually, I like the way you almost had annotations of the data with the different presidents talking. So that was really nice, actually. So it's a nice detail.
Yeah,
it's like a timeline.
Yeah, we use sampling quite a lot in our work. It really like helps. It helps in two ways. One of which is like what you're talking about annotations and about drawing attention to a particular point or whatever. But another like thing is that it humanizes it a bit, right? If you've got somebody speaking or singing or something like that, it makes it a bit more human. And this is always a problem that, you know, data people have to deal with, that they're trying to turn, you know, these tables of numbers into something that actually resonates emotionally with people. And a human voice is a great way to do that.
Yeah. I was wondering, like, if you have, this is my questions, by the way. So, like, you have, when you do things with a visualization, you have to think about a bit, like how colors interact and how they can actually even be culturally dependent, and some might interpret them in some way and other people in a different way. Is there anything in music as well? Because I mean, it feels like
so
you would
many
have
things.
even more.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has got emotional resonance, right, in them to do with some sort of music, right? You play a kind of 80s style synthesizer and you're immediately getting like neon lights and big robots or whatever. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. But like, my point is that that you have to be really, really careful, actually, because if you like go all out emotional and try and like spark this strong emotional response, it can hit a lot harder than you're expecting, and especially with some people. So it's something you've really got to be careful with.
There's no such thing as a neutral sound, and you have to be responsible with how you sonify. You know, there isn't quite that, like I was saying about sonification is more immersive. It doesn't give you that overview. You know, it can kind of give you a bit of a gut punch if it's well done, and you need to do that judiciously and with the right data and for the right reasons.
Yeah, that's cool. That's kind of cool. Maybe there's a need as well for, because I like the way you put it, layers on top of each other, and it almost feels like this would need not a grammar of graphics for visualization, but a grammar of sonifications. How do you actually would layer it? Because you had the beat going in the background, that would be the thing that continues all the way, and then you put
it's like an axis, right? The beat. Exactly. It sort of like helps you keep track of where you are to some extent.
And then you put on different sounds on top of it, and then you had the annotation layer at top as well. So it was really, really nicely done.
Thank you.
So, and let's see. Nina actually asked you again here. Are you thinking about your own voiceovers and comments on top of the audio? That might be a way of explaining what you're hearing. Like
yeah, that's an interesting question. The podcast episodes, as we've planned them out at the moment, will include our own voices, similar to the one that we just previewed for you. Although the track itself will normally not have commentary from us. However, the beer episode, which I mentioned earlier on in the talk, that we're integrating the commentary with the music a bit more in the form of this interview that we have with Marlon Dowinger, the beer expert that we mentioned earlier. So they kind of merge into one another more, the music and the commentary.
Super. Let's see if anyone else has a question. Otherwise, maybe we should start wrapping it up. But
I think Jasper has one there.
Yeah, there we go.
He says, shall I read it out?
Yeah, go for it.
I was part of a group building a generative music piece encoding the activity of an unborn baby in the womb to removing instruments and stems from a music piece meant for live broadcasting to family members and friends. That sounds super cool.
Really, really cool. Yeah.
And then he links to a portfolio page with some tech details. But he also said, you talked about sound being something that you can't escape, immersive, etc. But on the other hand, it's also very possible to have it as a background track like we did. Any more experience comments on this application of live data sonification? Yeah, I love this. So this is kind of a bit like having a soundscape in the background that can more passively draw your attention to certain things. It's a bit more like generative, I suppose. Rather than creating a finished piece of music, you're creating a system. And this is actually the fifth of the four of the different sonification types that the German sonification researcher who Hermann, that's his name, defined. Thomas Hermann. And he he talks about like sonification systems, and it's basically like building a system that will be able to respond to live data that is coming in and generate something that is, like useful or musically interesting or a pleasure to listen to or whatever, whatever your goal is for the sonification. I think it's super interesting. It's not something that we've done heaps and heaps of, but since the start of the year or so, I've got some like hardware stuff, and I'm starting to like try and do some like generative sonifications with like live API data and things like that. So this is something I'm really interested in. I'm definitely going to check out the page that you mentioned.
Super.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, Miriam?
No, I'm just to kind of make the general point that, yeah, that's absolutely true of music in general, that there is this kind of spectrum between ambient background and then immersive foreground, and all steps in between are possible. And I think it's cool to explore sonification with that in mind as well, and to think about ambient sonifications is really cool. So yeah, it's a good point.
Can I address another comment that Nina put in the chat, which is that this is a great way to make dataviz more accessible? Completely, we totally agree with that. Accessibility isn't a huge part of our project on Loud Numbers specifically, but there's loads of examples of dataviz being really enhanced to bring it to a wider audience through sonification. And Miriam, you've got a good example of this, right?
Yeah, there's one called Hear the Blind Spot, and I'll share the link in the chat shortly. It's a sonification which is put together explicitly to be accessible to people who are blinded, partially sighted, who don't have who basically can't read charts, and so the charts are directly sonified. And it's based on it's put together by an Ethiopian NGO in partnership with Data for Change volunteer group, who are an organization that I also work for, and I'm putting the link in the chat now. Yeah, it's a simple sonification with voiceover of a narrative script, and the charts themselves are simply mapped to pitch, a little bit like in two-tone, so you can hear the data as it changes. Oh, someone's in Ethiopia. Hi. Brilliant.
All right. So All right. If nobody has any more questions right now, how do you you posted links actually, but to your Twitter account. Is that if anyone wants to get in touch with you, is that the way you?
Yeah, so our website is here. You can sign up to our mailing list, which goes out every Friday. And it's basically just kind of, here's what we've done on the podcast this week. And here is some other interesting sonification stuff we've found on the web kind of thing. It's very casual. You can subscribe and unsubscribe whenever you want. It's totally chill. It's like the secret club of sonification fans. We love it. And then you can also, follow us on Twitter if you want. I've put another link in there. And if you want to email us, tell us about your sonification ideas, ask us questions. I think it's like numbersloud@gmail.com. We couldn't get loud numbers at gmail.com, so we put it backwards.
I don't know who's got loud numbers.
Yeah.
Should email
Probably
them.
not even using it.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for your presentation. I thought it was really cool. So
thank you.
I think we're gonna wrap up the meetup event right now, and we're not planning anything for the next month, but we'll see if we can have another one in a month and a half's time or so. So, and I hope you all enjoy this, and that you'll come and visit us and watch the next one as well. It'll be awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey. Thanks for joining, everyone. Everyone's gone.
Yeah. All right. Let's stop recording.